We're learning more about a flight from Singapore to Shanghai that temporarily lost power to both engines this weekend.
Yeah, how does that sound?
That sounds incredibly scary.
Transportation correspondent Kris Van
Wow.
Cleave has been following this story, and he joins us now from Washington. Both engines lost.
That's
How
incredible.
does that happen?
Well, it's exceptionally rare for a modern airliner to lose both of its engines. That did happen to Singapore Airlines Flight 836. It was flying from Singapore to Shanghai. Apparently, about 3.5 hours into the flight, the plane encountered severe weather at 39,000 feet, weather severe enough to cause both of the engines to go offline. We understand from the airline one of the engines came back fairly quickly in order to restart the second engine. The pilots descended. There's a report that they descended as low as 13,000 feet, went through a checklist process, got the second engine running, and then continued on with their flight. But certainly very scary moments there when you have an airliner over the water. We understand it was about 160 miles from Hong Kong when it lost both engines, and then was able to get them running again and continue on, landed safely in Shanghai. Now, the Singapore version of the National Transportation Safety Board is investigating this. The engines on the Airbus A330-300 aircraft, you're looking at pictures of it now on the screen, they are Rolls-Royce engines. They are the company's best-selling engines. And what you're looking at now, this is video of a water test where they basically flood the engine with water, and you can see they're designed to handle an awful lot of water. I mean, these engines suck in a lot of water when they fly through a storm. They test them for this. So circumstances where they shut down in severe weather are very, very rare.
You know, this is, I'm sure, news to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I didn't know weather conditions could shut down engines.
They say that to us all the time. They say, look, you know, planes don't fly out of the sky in the midst of bad weather. And most planes, as you well know, Chris, can typically fly with one engine. But I'm not sure that planes are designed when both engines flame out to continue flying. And so, you know, you sort of gave us some of the background exactly of how this could have happened. But how did the plane stay up in the air for that time when both of those engines went out?
Well, even without engines, the design of the aircraft, the aerodynamics of the airplane will allow it to essentially glide as it would carefully descend. So certainly you want your airliner to run with at least one of its two engines. The A330 has one of the longer ratings to operate over water. It's designed to be able to go at least 180 minutes on one engine. That's more than 1,000 nautical miles. So it certainly can operate with one engine. And you know, there's been a move away from four-engine aircraft, in part because these engines are so reliable now that it is almost unthinkable that you would have both engines shut down and not be able to restart. And in this case, the period of time where you were flying with no engines was relatively limited, and the pilots clearly felt secure enough in the aircraft to continue on to their final destination. They didn't divert to Hong Kong, which they certainly could have done. And we understand this was a very new Airbus A330 that was delivered fairly recently to Singapore Airlines, according to reports. So a very new aircraft. The A330 has a very good safety record. The engines have a very good safety record. Now, Rolls-Royce, Singapore Airlines, and the Singapore version of the NTSB are certainly going to look at this and try to understand what was in that weather pattern that they flew through that might have shut down the engines. And I was thinking about the last time that an airliner made news for losing both engines, and the best I could come up with off the top of my head was the Miracle on the Hudson, and that was a bird strike that physically took out the engines and left them unable to operate.
Well, clearly the pilots used their skills with A-plus precision here and getting this plane out of danger. But what are the passengers feeling? Like, do they know that the engines are out? Is that something that we could tell in the cabin?
I'd be going more scotch.
Yeah. Well, you know, it would depend on how long the two engines were actually out. You would, at the point where both engines turned off, notice a lot less noise in the cabin, most likely. And if the plane did, in fact, descend to 13,000 feet from 39,000 feet, you're going to know that you are in a controlled descent. So the passengers would have been aware of that. I suspect the pilot would have made an announcement that they are having some kind of mechanical issue and are going to descend to try to troubleshoot that. You know, so yeah, I imagine that it could be a kind of scary experience. I've been on aircraft, I've been on a military aircraft when they have shut off engines, and you do notice a difference in certainly the noise and the performance of the airplane when you're flying with fewer engines than you took off with. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're in any danger. As long as one of those engines is running, that plane's going to operate safely.
All right, Kris, I've had an opportunity to fly Singapore Airlines. It's one of the best airlines in the world. But, as our transportation correspondent, I'd like you to tell me and our viewers what the most dangerous part of any journey that it is that we take. Because everybody, especially in the last year or so, we've had moments where that we've had some very significant crashes, we've had some significant incidences, but it is still the safest way to travel, is it not?
It is. Your drive to the airport is way more dangerous than your flight. And certainly if you're flying Singapore Airlines, this is an airline with a sterling safety record. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of focus on aviation issues, particularly in Asia. And, it's almost painting with too broad of a brush because airlines like Singapore operate, are consistently listed as one of the safest airlines in the world to fly.
You heard it there from our transportation correspondent, folks. And I'm telling myself over and over again, you should listen to Kris Van Cleave and all the other experts.
Vlad, I would recommend booking into their Global First suites.
Oh, yeah. Trust me.
It's a big anchor. You can afford that.
Yeah.
We take that you've experienced.
Yes, I'll also take that advice,
service.
Mr. Van Cleave. Thank you very much. You can sign my expense report.
Sure thing. Approved.
Thanks, Kris.
Thanks so much, Kris.
For the suggestion.
Yeah.
I still get so much anxiety though when I fly.
I'm a very nervous flyer, and it's funny because people say that. They'll tell us, they say, don't you guys spend a lot of time in airplanes? And yes, a lot of time in airplanes, and you just sort of have to say to yourself, well, as Kris pointed out, that it is probably the safest part of your journey, and the statistics are and the odds are in your favor. But man, when we report on these stories, it does sort of...
Try to tell myself that the next time I'm in wicked bad turbulence.
Yes,
right?
I'm not looking forward to that.